1974 was a year of turmoil in the UK. Up to this point, we had endured a 3-day week, blackouts, hyperinflation, 2 general elections, as people had lost touch with politicians. Politically and socially, there was upheaval after upheaval. Surely 1975 would offer something to soothe and to relax, especially at tea times before all that bad news. Nope. January 1975 saw a 10-part serial on the BBC aimed primarily at children in a tea time slot on a Monday. It was kidult through and through. Even warnings were given out before the broadcast of some of the episodes. It's all about change in this programme of look, look and look again. The backbone to the television programme of the changes was an amalgamation of a triumvirate of stories penned by novelist Peter Dickinson. The first of these was published in 1968 and was called The Weathermonger. In this story, it sees an alien energy possessing the United Kingdom. This unidentifiable and seemingly malevolent force causes the nation to reject modernisation and technology. People here commit heinous vandalism and destruction via violent outbursts, where they appear to be possessed, smashing machinery to pieces. This machinery, whether it be trains, cars or household items such as fridges, and even electric kettles, become the focal point of unbridled destruction and becomes the embodiment of evil. Even to speak of this technology becomes strictly taboo. This Luddite regression plunges England into the Dark Ages, where the ways of life regress to that of pre-industrial times, and the superstitious and narrow-minded provincial nature of people dangerously returns too, along with other trappings of peril associated with ignorance and piousness. In the society, which rapidly becomes almost feudalised, there exists an elite group of gifted people. One is called Geoffrey, whose power is that of a weathermonger, capable of influencing the weather by mystic force. Accompanied by a young girl called Sally, he steals a Rolls Royce and both pilgrim around Gloucestershire on a mission to find out the catalyst that has caused such calamity. They eventually catch up with the culprit, a megalith called the Necromancer. It's revealed that Merlin had once tempered its powers and laid it to rest. However, it was only dormant, and thanks to an excavation and the attempts to harness its power again, this power as old as time itself, by the deluded character Mr. Furbelow, the Necromancer wakes and decides, since the time of Merlin, what it sees it doesn't like. It decides to reverse things back. Sally and Geoffrey reason with the Necromancer and informs it that without humanity's evolution, including that of technology, it will stagnate, decay, and ultimately perish. Seeing reason, the Necromancer hibernates as society is given a second chance to recondition. In 1969, Dickinson followed the Tell the Weathermonger with a story called Heartsease. It focuses on the main protagonist called Otto, who is an American spy who arrives to investigate the reason behind the calamity in the UK. Otto is incarcerated and condemned as a warlock by the xenophobic and fearful villagers whom attempt to murder him in case he unsettles their newly gained powers, but Otto is ultimately rescued by a family who've made home on a barge, the Heartsease, Finally, in 1970, the final book was published which rounds off this triumvirate, The Devil's Children. It was set at the beginning of the Changes and focuses on young Nikki Gore, a young girl separated from her family who joins a band of nomadic Sikhs. The Sikhs are not tainted by this malevolent force and are interested in building some sort of future with the assistance of machinery, which resonates with Nikki as she too feels less affected. However, this causes trouble with practically every other person they come into contact with, as they find themselves constantly fleeing pious bigots, bandits, religious zealots, and maniacal technophobes. So those are the books. But when it came to a TV production, things started as far back as 1971 for The Changes, when Anna Home negotiated the rights to the novels. Initially, Home envisaged The Changes to be a 13-part adaptation, but this was culled down to just 10 episodes and was accepted for production in the latter part of 1972. In 1973, after applying to Dickinson's agents for permission to televise literary material, it was almost going to get off the ground, but the filming was later postponed due to internal union and cameraman strikes. The Changes was near to cancellation, but Home firmly stood her ground and argued that to cancel the show would be a waste of time and effort already put into this production. Home also added that it would have a pernicious consequence to children's television drama production in general, and there was also the negative connotations for the BBC based on the BBC's prestige and the impact to the mettle of the production department. Time went by and things were put on hiatus. Eventually, their words were listened to and the wheels were set in motion again, and filming began between April and July of 1974. Anna Home decided to make reasonable but significant differences from the books, especially the chronological aspect, which could not have been captured in an episodic format, as in the books there is a big time lapse between events. Therefore, Home made the last book, The Devil's Children, the backbone of the first 5 episodes, and blended this with Heartsease and finally The Weathermonger. Home also dispensed with the varying gamut of protagonists and boiled this down to one main lead character and her journey, this being Nikki Gore. Her age was also changed, making her about 15 in the series, and real-life actress Vicky Williams was 17. The character of Jonathan also evolved from his minor inclusion in the Heartsease novel and became prolific to the latter set of episodes. The Changes was also decided to be shot fully on location and on 16mm film, a highly unusual thing to do for the time, especially for a children's production. Fortunately, this is a salvation, as the filming gives the whole series an air of grittiness which would have been lost with the contrived and manufactured ambience of 1970s television constraints. Thank God actual cave interiors were filmed, as despite the best attempts in TV production of this time, polystyrene rocks and the artifice of cave interiors created by prop and scenery men would have really been in detriment to the ethereal conviction of the programme, I'm thinking. The opening episode to The Changes is a prime example of televisual dystopia, which also mimics the saddeningly violent troubles that were occurring in Northern Ireland at the time, as well as also mimicking the mob rule of the union and the strikes as well that were happening. The total collapse of society represented in the programme is random, nightmarish intercuts and must have scared the bejesus out of the cosy tea time viewer, not to mention the elements of parental possession as Nikki Gore's father bashes the TV set to buggery in one sequence. Nicky's parents are convincingly played, as most thesps of this era do play these parts well, and these faces, or these actors, are well-known faces of the time. The father is played by Doctor Who regular and cult TV stalwart Bernard Horsfall, and the mother is played by Sonia Graham, whose CV also highlights some cult TV treats as the TV programme Escape into Night and the forerunner to Prisoner Cell Block H, Within These Walls. Nature is also topsy-turvy here, and the eagle-eyed viewers will also note the crafty intercuts from Hammer horror film Quatermass and The Pit in some of the scenes.
What's happening?
This is a true symphony of unnerving, synth-noised smashing of mechanics, flame, and violent hysteria. Upon broadcast, the episode generated 22 complaints via the telephone and 16 written ones, challenging its tea time audience suitability. The upheaval to society affects everyone, but Nicky Gore less so we learn the UK is cut off from the rest of the world by the changes. Nicky's parents lose her in this maelstrom of anti-tech mania and must make it to France, where things are a little more settled. The father here is in a dichotomy as he loses his daughter, but has his pregnant wife's welfare to consider. Callously, they both sod off, leaving their daughter to fend for herself, with the rationale of, well, she can look after herself. Here's an ideal opportunity, she's of that age. Residing to the fact Nicky's parents won't be back anytime soon, Nicky decides to make her own way there and meets a group of Sikhs who, after a bit of a distancing, start to begin to look after her. And as Nicky knows the area, and due to her ethnicity, which would mean she would be less likely to face adversity from the yokels, she agrees to help them. The Sikh travellers seem unaffected by the changes and begin to create a small settlement at an abandoned farm, setting up a forge where they hope to use their mending skills to barter for food from a nearby village, where Nicky volunteers to become chief negotiator. The head of the community, Mr. Bernard, played by A for Andromeda and the Andromeda Breakthrough's David King, is very hostile towards the Sikh community and refers to them as the devil's children, but decides a truce with them if their craft work helping the village is of exceptional quality, which it is. However, the village is attacked by a posse of merciless bandits who slay the leader of the village and begin their tyranny by first kidnapping and imprisoning the children to hold the village to ransom. The Sikhs, fearing for their children, join forces with the villagers to quash the evil outlaws, and unity is restored, but not without human loss.
And so, when the prince woke up, he looked into the garden and saw the most beautiful princess.
Chat has beaten him. It should be safe to leave soon.
As soon as the prince saw Princess Shahpasand, he fell in love with her, and she with him. And so, with the consent of the demon Jasdwil, they were married. One day, when he was out hunting...
Kewell! What's happening? Is it all over yet?
Almost. A lot of them are dead, but so are 2 of our people. There are still a few robbers here, but we'll get them. Chacha Ji says you're to take the children back to the village and tell the people there what's happening. And try and get them to come and help, if you can. We could do with some reinforcements. I must rush now. Good luck, Nikki.
Thanks, and you.
Nikki leaves the community, making her way to the coast, and decides she could stop with her aunt in the Cotswolds. However, an accident leaves Nikki abandoned once more. Disorientated after a blow to the head, she seeks refuge in a village barn in the small hamlet of Shipton. We know the locality is rural, as people round these parts talk in Mummerset, who are they does. Nikki falls asleep, and unfortunately she is found by the local witch finder Davy Gordon, played superbly by actor David Garfield, known to Doctor Who fans as Neva in The Face of Evil, and other BBC productions like the superb original Poldark and the seafaring boar that was the Oneiden line. Davy gets in a pious tiz, and after some biblical ranting accuses Nikki of being a witch and puts her on trial, where she is found guilty and will, by cockcrow no doubt, be put to death by stoning. However, her innocence is believed by brother and sister Jonathan, played by Keith Ashton, and Margaret, who the character is understated in most reviews of the series, and she's played here by Zuleika Robson. They both rescue Nikki from such a fate, and Jonathan and Nikki head to a barge called Heartsease, which could make it to France, all the time being pursued by Davy Gordon and his fanatical followers. After a tremendous showdown at a lock, Nikki and Jonathan manage to escape. Heartsease heads to France, but is struck by a supernaturally guided lightning bolt, and Nikki and Jonathan swim for the shore. In an interview, Vicky Williams, the actress who played Nikki, recounts she nearly drowned during the filming of this sequence due to the clothing, which got very heavy because of the water, and also becoming entangled in the reeds. A good old 1970s health and safety, where a response back then would have most probably been, well, you shouldn't have been larking about in there. This unfortunately left Williams slightly traumatised for some time. When they make it to shore, they are eventually welcomed into the self-sufficient homestead of ex-rat racers Michael and Mary, played by a rather hirsute Tom Chadbourne, who played the Doctor Who companion who shamefully never was, Duggan in the story The City of Death. And his wife is played by Miralina Kendall, another, you'll know the actress when you see her face. And here she is. Nearby, Nikki and Jonathan learn of a quarry and a legend around Merlin from Michael.
It's really cold for June, isn't it?
Real necromancer's weather.
What?
That's what people around here say when the weather's particularly good or bad.
But what does it mean?
Nothing much. It's just a saying, like St. Swithin. But I fancy it means a bit more these days.
Why is that?
Well, maybe you've noticed the weather's been very different since all the trouble started.
Remember those freak snowstorms when it all began? And think of the last few months, weeks and weeks of perfect summer weather. And now this, it's like winter.
And then there were those thunderstorms and hail showers out of a clear blue sky. Like when we were crossing the estuary in Heartsease. It was extraordinary. Do you remember, Nikki? And then the engine packed up.
That's what people call necromancer's weather. It always seems to come from the west, beyond the mountains.
Do you think it means anything?
I'm not sure. It was certainly very strange here when everything started.
Well, it was everywhere.
Here particularly, I think. It was as if there was some source of power from over there beyond the mountains.
What kind of power?
I don't know. People who came from over there said there were earthquakes.
I suppose something must have started all this off.
Do you think it will ever change back?
I hope so. Not for us particularly, we're happy enough. But as you know, there are thousands of people who aren't. And I don't think you can just stop progress and evolution because there are things about it that you don't like. The balance of everything gets upset, and that's what's happened now. But until we know what caused it, we can't do anything about it. And anyway, there aren't many people thinking and talking about it like we are.
Nicky and Jonathan arrive at the quarry and meet the unhinged Mr. Furbelow. They both discover an excavation, and Mr. Furbelow's interference awoken at the ancient arcane forces which are the catalyst for the changes they have both been embroiled in. Furbelow forbids both of them not to venture into the cavern, which houses a megalith responsible for the energies unleashed. Eventually they usurp Furbelow, and Vicky realises this was her quest all along, to confront the power. Nicky and Jonathan find the megalith emanating a powerful field of energy, and learns from a psychic connection with it that the stone is as old as time itself. Nicky cannot pinpoint the force, but tells Jonathan it is somehow the essence of planet Earth. It had roused once before, but was foiled by Merlin, who absorbed part of its energy and gave him his magical powers, and in return received energy from the human Merlin, which kept an equilibrium and synergized balance, and therefore, after this, it went back into dormancy. However, it is now awoken by mankind, and seeing the mess humans have made, it wants to press the reset button. It tunes into Nicky and relives some of her past encounters up until this point, and reveals the good representation of humanity as well as the bad, and balances the human condition.
A man disturbed you by mistake at a time which was wrong. A man touched and woke you. He was not a wicked man, but he felt your power and tried to use it. You fought against him, and your power shook our world. But you are destroying it. We're going back into a time we no longer belong in. Our world was not a perfect place, but what's happening now is worse. People have gone mad and are dying for no reason. Time cannot go backwards. Only you can stop it. Please. Please.
Nicky? Nicky?
Please. I know. I know.
Go soon. Today.
Go away, please. We cannot help you. Go away, please.
We call them the devil's children.
No ordinary human person would I near them wicked engines.
Charged him down, and I decree that she shall die by stone. I decree that we'll all join together in ridding the village of this evil.
Seeing the damage that this has caused, Nicky pleads with the disembodied force to return to its sleep, but it decides to go one better, and not only agrees with her after realization, but the energy also causes the quarry to implode, encasing the cavern in rockfall from the eroding cliffside, so it becomes self-entombed. Seemingly, Furbelow is also restored to his former rational self, albeit slightly confused and disorientated. Jonathan and Nikki leave the aftermath to find her parents as we, the viewer, witness the planet getting back on track to its pollutive, industrial, and quick-paced, exhaustive ways. The Changes is a smashing little series that reinvents Dickinson's books but doesn't lose too much of the diverse messages. It is only marred by what could be considered a rather flat denouement. However, there is plenty going on under the surface if you bother to scratch it. It's about duality, balance, civility, death and rebirth, the staples of most belief systems wrapped up in an Arthurian legendary overcoat. Nikki's journey from pigtailed schoolgirl to assertive young woman before our very eyes is also worthy of note. As it starts, she sat at a living room table worried about getting her schoolwork done on time, never taking her uniform off, to eventually progressing to be seen to be sat on Michael and Mary's sofa holding a baby dressed in bohemian garb, and also becomes a warrior, ultimately saving the planet. The transition here is expertly crafted. There's also the fact that her destiny has been mapped out right up to this point, so it's little wonder that she and Jonathan remain unaffected, and their balance with each other is also vital for Nikki to arrive and challenge the necromancer. Mary and Michael are also unaffected as they have rejected the modern city whirlpool for the good life of the bucolic surroundings so popular in the early to mid-70s and reflected in other television programmes of the time, as well as also the stable of genre films that I term as folk horror. Another obvious and refreshing change was the story's treatment of ethnicity, especially as the nation had, by about 1974-75, started to, or tried to start to adapt to multiracial diversity. The minority group here, the Sikhs, who I have always admired, here the Sikhs are portrayed with the piety they deserve. The Sikh community remains unaffected due to their balance and sense of overall justice. In the Sikh teachings, we have a belief system that celebrates the core belief of treating everyone equally, irrespective of who they are, to share earnings and selflessly serve others, and live a life of purity and communal respect. So it's no wonder with such a faith, the energy that emanates from the stone bypasses them, as their way of life and their axiom is uncorruptible. If Buddhists and pagans also featured in the plot, I'm sure these would have been unaffected too. The Sikhs are portrayed by some actors of this faith, and brown face is bypassed, adding to further credibility, and the plot doesn't dwell too much on the racism aspect, although you know it's there, simmering away, rather broodingly. And also, the community here isn't stereotyped or the subject of derogatory jokes, which was the norm for some programming of this era in the United Kingdom, as other shows naively dealt with it this way to combat its old-school fears of the unknown and come to terms with its island mentality and bigoted jitters at the dawn of what we now call multiculturalism. Even here the show refrains also from ethnic by number, which television and film does now, which is kind of racist in itself, as some films and TV shows have a cast these days like the beginning of some dodgy un-PC joke. My only regret is the Sikh community disappears, and although the series does fill in by introducing some other notable characters like Davy Gordon, I really liked this idea of showcasing another minority and faith, adding another dimension to the excellent plot. Further television gold with the changes is the use of locality and the undulating landscapes. It's wonderfully, wonderfully bucolic. This is all courtesy of the Mendips and the Forest of Dean, to name but a few. Of course, it's also expertly guided by the lens of the director John Prowse. To add that finishing touch, here is the soundtrack from radiophonic workshop musician Paddy Kingsland. I must admit, when it comes to Doctor Who, for example, and other snippets of the radiophonic workshop, I've never been a fan of the bleepity-bleep artificiality, and for me it had far more misses than hits. But here, for the changes, it works perfect, with its combination of tabla and sitar ethnicity and the rather lonesome soundtrack of the horn and other percussion instruments, offset of course by the otherworldliness of a sound representing the noise when it happens. I loved it. The changes remained absent for a long time off our screens, with only one repeat showing after a year later after its broadcast. It then cropped up on UK satellite TV station UK Gold 20 years later, and then went AWOL again for another 20 years until the British Film Institute presented it in 2014 in a decent DVD edition. If you get the chance to binge watch it, do so. Despite a few minor flaws, The Changes is thought-provoking adventure, and a little bit apt for the changes we are going through now, and contains, amongst many others, the message: no matter how hard as man tries, he will never become the master of nature's force, as we are all simply its guests, and we should always remember that. Until next time, keep clear of the pylons. Cheerio.
Those who find this girl guilty of being a witch, raise your hands! Thank you, friends. Unanimous decision. Now it is my duty to pass sentence. The Bible says it clear enough. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. So this witch must die. And I decree that she shall die by stoning. We'll all join together in ridding the village of this evil.